Have you ever looked in the mirror at 70, 80, maybe even 90, and thought, wait a second, who the hell is this person? Not just the face, the entire operating system. You've played the roles. The responsible one, the strong one, the agreeable one who never made a scene at Thanksgiving, even when Uncle Roger said something wildly offensive. You've smiled, nodded, problem solved, and quietly wondered why you feel like an actor in your own life. Carl Jung believed we don't just have personalities, we become them to survive. And then we spend the next 70 years wondering why we're exhausted. Maybe you were born intuitive, but learned early on that dreaming didn't pay the bills. Maybe you were a feeler, but being vulnerable got you laughed at, so you joined a bowling league instead. Or maybe you were always a thinker, but your heart never got the memo. Here's the brutal truth delivered lovingly. You might not be living as your real self. You might just be performing the most convincing version of who others told you to be. The good news, you're finally old enough to stop pretending. And today, you're going to meet the part of you that's been whispering, hey. Remember me, because the real you hasn't disappeared. They're just waiting for you to sit down, shut up, and listen. Let's begin. Part 1. The 4 paths you've been walking or avoiding. Let's start with something painfully obvious. You've been biased your entire life, and not just politically. Psychologically, you've had a dominant way of interpreting reality since childhood. And most likely, you've built your entire identity around that one function like a nervous squirrel hoarding acorns. Carl Jung said we all lean toward one of 4 functions, not like a smartphone app, but like a pair of glasses you forget you're wearing. They filter your decisions, your relationships, your regrets, and they probably caused more arguments than you care to admit. Let's break them down, shall we? 1. The thinkers, they worship logic. They alphabetize their spice rack. They will debate a traffic sign if it seems inconsistent. Feelings, that's cute, but where's the evidence? Thinkers are useful during estate planning and dangerous during funerals. 2. The feelers. These are the emotional diplomats. They cry when you cry. They want everyone to just get along, even if it means quietly seething in the bathroom. They won't tell you they're mad. They'll just slowly stop making eye contact until you crumble from guilt. 3. The sensors, salt of the earth types. Practical, grounded, excellent at remembering where they put the duct tape. But ask them to imagine life after death, and they'll say, why not just enjoy your sandwich? These are the folks who trust what they can grip, and only what they can grip. 4. The intuitives, big picture visionaries, poets, people who forget their keys while contemplating the meaning of existence. They live in the clouds and trip over coffee tables. You'll find them creating philosophies at 3 a.m. and forgetting to eat breakfast. Here's the kicker, you're not just one of these, but one of them is likely driving your psychological car, while the others are tied up in the back seat whispering, help. Buddhism teaches that clinging to any identity, no matter how shiny, is the root of suffering. And Jung agreed. If you live your whole life over-identifying with your dominant function, it doesn't make you wise. It makes you lopsided. So the real question isn't, which one are you? It's which one have you neglected for so long it's planning your emotional revenge. Let's keep going. Things are about to get even messier. Part 2. Introvert versus extrovert. The labels that lied to you. Let's clear up the biggest personality myth that's been messing with people since someone first whispered, she's just an introvert at a party in 1974. Carl Jung never said introverts hate people, and extroverts love small talk. That's hallmark psychology, not Jungian insight. Here's what he actually meant. Introverts direct energy inward, extroverts direct energy outward. That's it. It's about where your life force flows, not whether you like cocktail hour. So why do most of us think of introverts as quiet librarians and extroverts as overly caffeinated real estate agents? Because society loves easy labels. And also because somewhere along the line your burnout got mislabeled as your type. Let me give you an example. Eleanor, 81, thinks she's an introvert because she hates family reunions. But what she really hates is having the same conversation about cholesterol levels with her cousin Susan for the 5th year in a row. Meanwhile, Ron, 77, says he's an extrovert because he talks a lot. But the truth is, he just panics in silence. If nobody's talking, he starts hearing the echo of his own mortality. So he fills the void with weather updates and football stats. Here's the Buddhist curveball. Neither introversion nor extroversion is yourself. They're energy patterns. They arise, they pass. Just like thought's breath or how you feel about your in-laws. The problem isn't being one or the other. The problem is clinging to the identity as if it means something permanent about you. One day you're the quiet monk. The next day you're singing karaoke in a nursing home lobby because something just snapped. Life is unpredictable. So are you. So instead of asking, am I an introvert or an extrovert? Try this. When do I come alive and when do I shut down? Because the labels don't define you, but your energy. Where it goes, how it flows, that tells the story. And spoiler alert, it's not the same story forever. Part 3, the 8 flavors of madness, also known as personality types. Now that we've poked holes in the whole introvert-extrovert thing, it's time to dive into what Jung really gave us 8 gloriously dysfunctional ways of processing the world. Each of us operates with a dominant function that gets filtered either inward introverted or outward extroverted. This gives us a fancy-sounding buffet of psychological flavors like introverted intuition or extroverted feeling. Sounds like personality types and salad dressings had a baby. Let's meet the 8 types. And yes, you're going to recognize at least one of them from your last family dinner. 1. Extroverted thinking, E.T., also known as the spreadsheet samurai. Think of Mildred, 75, who organizes her pantry by expiration date and makes to-do lists for her dog. She likes measurable results, logical systems, and gets hives if someone talks about following your heart. Shadow overlooks emotional nuance, thinks grief can be scheduled. 2. Introverted thinking, Iet, alias the silent philosopher. Harold, 78, rewrote his will 17 times because he couldn't stop questioning whether fair was objectively definable. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's about the fallacies in your logic. Shadow, emotionally constipated, may die of overthinking. 3. Extroverted feeling, EF nickname, the room reader. Linda, 72, knows when you're upset before you do. She'll bake cookies for your depression and host a support group before she finishes her coffee. Shadow may vanish into others' needs and forget she exists. 4. Introverted feeling. If known as the inner monk with a Wi-Fi password, this is Carl, 80, who hasn't spoken at Thanksgiving in 12 years because he found out nobody recycles. His morals are carved in stone, and his emotions run 3,000 leagues beneath the surface. Shadow feels. Everything shares nothing. 5. Extroverted sensing, ES, also known as the action junkie, Grandpa Tony. 76, rides motorcycles, grills with his shirt off, and insists on climbing ladders even though everyone tells him not to. Shadow, terrified of silence and long-term planning. 6. Introverted sensing, his nickname, the traditionalist time traveler. Agnes, 84, still uses the same dish soap her mother did. She finds comfort in routines and can recall every detail of her wedding in 1956, including what her cousin was wearing. Shadow resistant to change, stuck in nostalgia loops. 7. Extroverted intuition, NAK. A. The walking brainstorm. Mark, 70, has a new business idea every Tuesday. He's convinced he could invent a levitating rocking chair if he could just remember where he put the schematics. Shadow finishes nothing, moves fast, crashes often. 8. Introverted intuition, and also known as the Zen prophet. Nobody understands. Susan, 79, speaks in riddles and metaphors. She just knows things but can't explain how. Her family thinks she's a little odd. She might be a genius or possessed. shadow. Can't always prove what they feel deep down, often misunderstood. The beauty of these types, they're not prisons, they're just starting points, and every one of them has a shadow. That's the part we'll meet next, the side of you you've been politely ignoring for decades while it's been quietly sharpening its claws. Part 4, the function. You repressed and why it's planning a coup. So far, we've talked a lot about the personality function that drives your bus. But let's talk about the one you locked in the trunk. Because while you've been busy polishing your strengths and clinging to your favorite way of thinking like it's a precious heirloom, another part of you has been stewing, waiting, watching, like a cat that's been ignored for 40 years and has finally decided to pee on your pillow. Carl Jung called this your inferior function, the one you naturally struggle with, avoid, or straight up deny. It's not broken. It's just buried under layers of habit shame and childhood conditioning. Let's make it real. If you've always prided yourself on being logical, your repressed function might be feeling. Translation. You cry when the dog dies in the movie, and then you spend the next 3 days wondering if you're mentally unwell. If you're a hardcore doer, a sensor who lives by checklists, your repressed function might be intuition. You've had a few spiritual dreams, but they made you uncomfortable, so you told no one and went back to labeling your spice jars. Here's the Buddhist twist. The part of yourself you avoid isn't your enemy, it's your karma. It's the gatekeeper to your next level of awakening. And in late life, that suppressed function doesn't just knock politely. It storms the gates. That's why you see older people suddenly turning inward, writing poetry, or weeping during slow piano music. It's not dementia. It's the repressed function finally getting screen time. Your psyche is trying to balance the books before you leave this world. So if you've started feeling strange in ways you can't explain, less certain, more emotional, suddenly artistic, or oddly peaceful, that's not failure. That's your neglected function finally stretching its legs. And trust me, it's been cramped in there for decades. Part 5, Meet the Shadow. He's been living in your basement rent-free. There's a part of you you'd rather not talk about. You know the one? The version of you that gets unreasonably irritated by cheerful people. The one that fantasizes about smashing a ceramic rooster every time your neighbor brings up their gluten-free lifestyle. The one that smiles politely in public and simmers in secret. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it's hidden. It's the psychological storage closet where you've stuffed every part of yourself that didn't get a gold star growing up. Your anger, your jealousy, your repressed desire to dance shirtless in the moonlight and eat pie with your hands. You learned early on, be nice, be good, be quiet, be useful. And anything that didn't fit that costume banished to the unconscious. But here's the punchline. The shadow doesn't stay buried. It leaks out through passive-aggressive comments, through petty judgments, through mysterious rage that shows up when someone cuts in line at the post office. And the older you get, the more the shadow stops knocking and starts kicking in the door. Buddhist insight, the shadow is Mara the tempter. Not to be destroyed, but to be invited in for tea. As the Buddha did under the Bodhi tree, we don't banish our demons. We recognize them and stop letting them drive the damn chariot. So here's your next assignment, not to fight the shadow, but to befriend it. Not because it's pretty, but because it holds the key to the parts of yourself you left behind in the name of being acceptable. And let's be honest, at 70 or 80, who are you still trying to impress? It's time to turn the lights on in the basement and ask that growling voice, what do you need from me now? Part 6, Individuation, the journey you're finally old enough to take. Most people think the goal of aging is to stay young. Jung would have laughed himself into a coma, because the goal isn't to stay young, it's to finally become yourself. Not the version that kept everyone happy, not the one that smiled while dying inside at office birthday parties. Not the personality that wore politeness like a shield and called it maturity. We're talking about something deeper, something messier, something sacred, It's called individuation, and no, it's not a trendy yoga term or a new kind of herbal supplement. It's the psychological equivalent of throwing out every role you've been assigned, daughter, father, caretaker, the responsible one, and asking, but who am I really underneath the performance Buddhism calls this non-self? Not because you don't exist, but because the version of you that's been running the show, that was just a collage of coping mechanisms, unmet needs, and inherited family trauma in a pantsuit. Here's what individuation looks like in real life. A 79-year-old man who spent his whole life managing logistics suddenly starts writing poetry about whales. A woman who was everyone's emotional rock for 50 years realizes she's never once cried for herself, and finally does. Or boom, a retired professor stops correcting everyone's grammar and just listens. No applause, no job title, no productivity metrics, just presence. That's the magic. You don't become someone new, you become someone whole. You stop arguing with the parts of yourself you used to exile. You sit at the table with them, you pass them the mashed potatoes, and for the first time in decades, your insides stop fighting each other. So no, it's not a breakdown, it's a reunion, and the only invitation required is honesty. Part 7. MBTI Misuse and the Danger of Self-Diagnosis. Let's talk about that one time someone took a 10-minute quiz online and decided they were an INFJ, which then became their entire personality for the next decade. Sound familiar? Yeah, blame MBTI. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator took Carl Jung's elegant mystical framework and turned it into a BuzzFeed horoscope wearing a business suit. Instead of helping people grow, it gave them a label to cling to. I'm an INTJ, so I don't do emotions. I'm an ESFP, which means I'm not responsible for the dishes. Look labeling isn't inherently bad, but mistaking the label for the whole of who you are, that's spiritual malpractice. In Buddhism, we call this attachment to identity. It's like mistaking the finger pointing at the moon for the moon. Jung called this inflation of the persona. Same disease, different robes, and it's dangerous. Because once you identify with a type too deeply, you stop growing. You use it as an excuse. I'm just not the kind of person who forgives. I can't meditate, I'm a censor. I don't do emotions, I do facts. Meanwhile, your soul's over there, waving a tiny white flag like, hey, I'd like to evolve now. Let me be blunt, you are not a 4-letter summary. You are not a self-help meme. You are not a life coach's revenue stream. You are a strange, beautiful, ever-shifting river of functions, contradictions, shadow puppets, and forgotten dreams. So the next time you hear someone proudly say, I'm an INFP, just smile gently and think to yourself, oh, sweetie, you're so much weirder than that. Part 8. Personality in Old Age, What They Never Told You. Here's a little-known fact, the personality you've been carrying around like an emotional suitcase since your 20s. Yeah, it's outdated software. Turns out your personality isn't a static identity, it's a working draft, and the older you get, the more the universe edits it without asking. Neurologically, your brain rewires. Psychologically, your priorities shift. Spiritually, your ego starts to collapse like an old folding chair, and honestly, thank God. Because what worked at 40 might strangle you at 80. That intense drive for success you had. Now it just gives you indigestion. Your need to fix everyone's problems. You finally realize nobody asked. You used to be the thinker who had all the answers. Now you're learning how to sit in silence and let the questions breathe. This isn't a breakdown, it's maturation. And Carl Jung knew it. He believed personality was meant to evolve across the lifespan, especially in later life, when the ego's grip starts to loosen and the true self begins to stretch. Erik Erikson called this stage integrity versus despair. Buddhism calls it letting go of form. We call it finally not giving a damn what Aunt Susan thinks. Here's the great news: the older you get, the less your persona matters. And the more your essence shines through. You're not here to be a better version of who you were. You're here to become someone new. someone softer, wiser, sometimes weirder, and maybe, just maybe, more yourself than ever. So don't fight it. Your personality isn't dying, it's just molting. Part 9, The Default Self, the Personality Society, built for you. Let's get uncomfortable for a second. What if the personality you've been defending your whole life wasn't your personality at all? What if it was just the safest mask you could find at the time Jung hinted at this? But let's take it further. Maybe you're not naturally responsible. Maybe you just had to grow up too fast. Maybe you're not a thinker. Maybe emotions weren't safe in your house growing up, so you intellectualized everything just to survive. Maybe you're not chill. Maybe you just dissociate like a pro because feelings are loud and nobody listened when you were 5. What we call a personality is often just a protective strategy that calcified. Buddhism says the self is not fixed, it's conditioned, meaning what you call you might actually be a long string of karmic reactions and societal programming with a good haircut. Let's go deeper. Were you rewarded for being helpful so you became a self-sacrificing feeler? Were you mocked for being dreamy so you buried your intuitive gifts and got a job in accounting? Were you praised for your silence so you forgot how to ask for what you need? Here's the kicker: you didn't choose this personality. It was assigned by family, by culture, by survival. But now you get to choose who walks the rest of the path. So the next time someone says, "That's just how I am," you can smile and think, "No, that's just how you were trained." And then lovingly start the jailbreak. Because the version of you that's trying to emerge now, she's not a defense mechanism. She's the real one. Part 10, Who You Are When You're Not Performing. Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and for some reason, you forget who you're supposed to be. Not in a medical emergency kind of way, but in the liberating, "Oh, thank God I'm not stuck in this costume anymore" kind of way. No more trying to be agreeable. No more trying to be smart. No more pretending to care about brunch plans or political small talk or that group chat from 2012 that still won't die. Just you. Raw, quiet, unpackaged, unperformed. Carl Jung called this the self, the true center of who you are beneath all the functions, defenses, and default roles. Buddhism calls it no self, not because nothing's there, but because it's not the you thought you had to protect. It's not the thinker, not the feeler, not the achiever, not the fixer. It's the spacious awareness behind all that. Ram Dass said, "We're all just walking each other home, but most of us are doing it in costume." So here's the radical question. Who are you when you're not performing? Not for your family, not for your career, not even for your spiritual ego. Who are you when the audience goes home, the lights go out, and the only voice left is the one that's been whispering your name since before language? If you're quiet long enough, you might hear it. And if you do, don't try to explain it. Just smile. Because that's the part of you that doesn't need a personality type. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't even need a name. It just wants you to finally come home. So, here we are. After 10 parts, a few uncomfortable truths, and more than one spiritual slap in the face, you might be wondering, who am I really? And the answer, friend, is both disappointing and miraculous. You are not your thoughts. You are not your role. You are not your Myers-Briggs score or your favorite way to overreact to stress. You are what remains when all the pretending stops. Carl Jung spent a lifetime mapping the unconscious, but what he ultimately discovered is something every old soul already suspects, that underneath the personality is presence. Underneath the persona is possibility. And underneath the noise of identity is silence watching. You haven't missed your chance. You haven't wasted your life. You've just been wearing a heavy coat someone else handed you, and it's okay to take it off now. You're finally old enough to stop performing, to feel the buried parts of you stretch and breathe, to realize that the version of you that's always been waiting isn't a stranger. It's the real you. So what now? Well, maybe today you don't figure it all out. Maybe today you just stop arguing with who you are and instead sit down beside yourself like an old friend and say, I'm here now. I see you. I'm ready. The journey isn't over. It's finally beginning.